Some years ago, I was doing a workshop for teachers that dealt in part with the importance of bringing kids in on decision-making in classrooms and giving them more choices about what they're doing. And while I was talking about that issue, one particular teacher, a third-grade teacher, had a funny look on her face, and I stopped and asked her if she wanted to say something. She did. She said, "You're making this sound a lot easier than it really is. When you've spent your career teaching traditionally and telling kids what to do, it's not so easy to turn that around and start bringing them in on decision-making." She said, "For years I was talking to kids about how this is our classroom, boys and girls. And one day she realized that in the most literal way, that was not true. She had decided, for example, how to decorate the room before they showed up on the first day. And she realized that she would have to stop doing that, but that was a hard thing to do. For the walls to be bare on the first day of school would make her look terrible to the principal, she feared, and to the parents during drop-off, compared to all the other classrooms brightly festooned with color down the hall. It took her a while to finally decide that she would explain to the principal and the parents what she was doing. And so, on that day, on the first day of school, she took a deep breath, left the walls bare, so that when the kids came in and learned one another's names, the first order of business would be to decide together how they wanted their classroom to look. Today, I want to talk about the results that teacher found, and more broadly, how we can bring students in on decision-making. In this, the first of a two-part episode on who gets to decide. I'm Alfie Kohn, and this is Kohn's Zone. Well, I don't want to hold you in suspense. The teacher reported that school year was the best one she had taught to date in her career. Not because there was something special about those kids, but because for the first time she was teaching with them. She was bringing them in on making decisions, starting with how to decorate the walls. During that first of many class meetings, the kids decided that one of the walls should be devoted to anything the kids, wanted to put on their spot. In other words, there would be a little space on the wall that belonged just to each individual kid. Whatever he or she was proudest of at the moment could be up there. So there would be individual choice superimposed on the collective decision to use the wall that way in the first place. They wanted blue construction paper, and it was going to be their wall. And she said, "Okay, let's do it." But the blue construction paper was something that they said at that same meeting that they wanted to put up themselves. This is, I guess, the annoying thing about democracy. Well, the teacher sighed inwardly and said, in effect, in for a penny, in for a pound. Let's do it. All right. Here's the pile of construction paper. Here's thumbtacks and staples and tape. Go to it. And the kids organized themselves, and they did it. But a really interesting thing happened. They put it up, and they realized it looked pretty crappy. In order for the paper to be on there neatly, they would have to measure it pretty accurately. And they weren't sure how to do that because the kids started looking at rulers, and they didn't understand what the little lines meant in between the numbers. So they asked her. And she gave them an impromptu fraction lesson, which she said was the most effective math lesson she had taught to that point in her career. Why? Not because of the skill of instruction, but because of the reason for the lesson. She was not teaching them fractions because it was the next section in her lesson plan or the next chapter in the textbook or because she was commanded to this year. or because they would need it next year. She taught them fractions because the kids needed to know fractions in order to pursue a project that they were in charge of. This is nothing more than warmed over John Dewey. Although I'll take that any day to piping hot behaviorism. The kids learned effectively because they had an interest in learning. And so she had begun to do something she hadn't done before, to let the kids have some say over the way their classroom looked, and ended up with an unexpected intellectual bonus where there was learning involved as a result of that decision. Howard Gardner, a Harvard cognitive psychologist, best known probably for his work in multiple intelligences, has a great line in one of his books. He imagines a kid coming home and parent asks, "So what'd you do in school today?" And the kid says, "Nothing." And Gardner's comment is, "That's probably true." The kid was taught things. That doesn't mean there was any learning or that the kid had any active role in what was happening. And yet, research shows that academic achievement, and more importantly, intellectual development, is much more likely to happen when kids have real voice in the learning itself. There's a study showing that preschoolers turn out more creative collages when they get to pick the materials they want to use for the collage, compared to a carefully matched group of kids the same age using exactly the same materials that were assigned to them. And then fast forward 10 years or so, and in high school chemistry, research shows that students learn chemistry more enthusiastically and effectively when they get to create, design the experiments that they're doing to confirm or disconfirm a hypothesis than when they simply read a textbook or do a lab that's already pre-digested for them. I mean, it's not really that surprising that kids learn most avidly when they get to choose which questions to explore, because that's just a subset of psychological research more generally showing that all of us are happier and more effective when we have some say over what happens to us. There's even more research on that, showing that 12-month-olds are a lot more entranced by a toy where they control the action of it than a similar toy that moves by itself. And now, fast forward decades, famous series of studies in the 1970s in nursing homes showing that when the residents of the nursing homes decide collectively on matters having to do with how they live there, how the place is going to be decorated, the activities, the schedule, they not only report themselves as being happier, they're actually healthier and they live longer. Trust me, there's not a lot of social psych experiments that show longer life as the outcome variable. But it's so powerful. It's so powerful that what's surprising is that people are systematically denied a chance to make decisions at school and at work and sometimes at home. The norm seems to be a kind of enforced passivity. In schools, it means that kids are on the receiving end of assignments and assessments, lectures and questions. And, you know, the really ironic thing is that as kids get older and have more experience and maturity and become more capable of making decisions, they typically have less opportunity to do that. You know, that in high school, they have less to say, typically, about what they do all day than a kindergartner does, which often isn't that much to begin with. Teens have less to say about their schooling than little kids. The average American high school, therefore, I like to say, is excellent preparation for living in the real world, assuming you're going to make your home in North Korea. The benefits at school of giving students more say extend beyond just higher achievement, though. They also provide psychological and ethical benefits. It's amazing to me, it always has been, how many adults complain bitterly about kids who just don't take responsibility for their own behavior, and then those same adults spend their days ordering kids around. Kids learn to make good decisions by making decisions, not by following directions. And we do find that they are able to learn that when they have had the chance not just to be prepared to live in a democratic society, but to participate in a variable, a function of democracy when they're kids. You could argue that even if there were no social, moral, or intellectual benefits of having choices, they ought to have them anyway. There's intrinsic value to letting people of all age have some control over the things that they experience. Teachers understand that, particularly when they've been controlled, which often happens. They see the value of autonomy, but how many teachers then turn around and deny that opportunity to choose that they themselves wanted to have when they decide how to run their classroom? That's a fork in the road. That's a major decision point for all teachers. Am I going to treat my kids the way I'm being treated or the way I wish I was being treated? So if they decide on the latter, that they're going to support the autonomy of their students, how do they do that? Why they should do that is pretty darn clear. As one group of researchers summarized the data, quote, autonomy-supportive teachers seek a student's initiative, whereas controlling teachers seek a student's compliance. And the benefits of supporting autonomy are remarkable. Quoting again, students with autonomy-supportive teachers compared with students with controlling teachers experience not only greater perceived autonomy, but also more positive functioning in terms of their classroom engagement, emotionality, creativity, intrinsic motivation, psychological well-being, conceptual understanding, academic achievement, and persistence in school. Unquote. That's powerful stuff. How do you do it? That's what I want to talk about for another few minutes now, and then in part 2 of this discussion. So step 1 is pretty obvious. Minimize coercion. Stop being unnecessarily controlling. And that includes moving away from the common tools of control and coercion, punishment and rewards. Do this, or you're going to suffer. Or do what I want, and here's what you'll get. Bribes and threats have to be phased out in order to promote the decision-making and autonomy that has all of these amazing benefits. But that's necessary and not sufficient. Step 2 is to affirmatively provide students with a lot more opportunity to make choices in all subject matter, at all ages, although obviously it's not going to play out the same way for a 4-year-old that it does for a 14-year-old, and for all sorts of issues, from the curriculum to the way the chairs are set up in the room. What are they learning? How are they learning it? What happens when they're done with a unit? How can they be assessed, which is a way of saying, how can the teacher learn how that unit went, what was successful and what wasn't? All of these questions are questions that should be opened to student participation. It's not enough to create a really terrific curriculum for students. You should be creating a terrific curriculum with students, often based on their questions. And there's loads of resources available for how to do that, which I will include in the show notes to this episode. But if that's step 2, step 1, remember, is diminishing control. Step 2 is giving them choices. Step 3 is to go beyond discrete choices, beyond the opportunity to just pick this over that, like, here's 5 books, pick one to read. Step 3 is about giving kids the opportunity to generate, not just to choose from a menu. Because autonomy support is not just about selection, it's about construction. In fact, the very term autonomy support comes from a branch of psychology called self-determination theory. And the important thing to realize here is autonomy support isn't just a way of teaching. It's a psychological concept that gets into having control over your own life, being an origin, having real voice. It's about the fundamental need that all human beings have to experience a sense of agency. And so what I'm going to be talking about from here on is how all of those benefits that the research shows can be experienced, derived in classrooms by giving kids more sense of what they're doing, and doing it not just individually, but collectively. Because when you have autonomy and community together, you have something that very few of us have the chance to experience even in our adult lives, which is democracy. And by that I mean meaningful democracy in the Deweyan sense. Not just voting, but choosing in the interstices, generating possibilities, working out decisions with the other people who are going to be affected in some kind of class meeting, which teachers of young children sometimes call group time or circle time, but which ought to go on all the way from preschool to graduate school. And that does, in fact, mean going beyond voting. Say, for example, that the question to be decided is, what field trip are we going to take next month? Well, the temptation is for the teacher to say, let's vote. Let's put some ideas up, all right? Some people are saying we should go to the zoo. How many want to go to the zoo? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11. Okay. How many want to go to the museum? 13. All right. Looks like we're going to the museum. The best thing you can say about that is it didn't take long to decide. Voting is efficient. Well, that's not fair, really. The best thing you can say about it is at least the teacher didn't decide unilaterally where they were going. The kids had some input here. But you've got 11 kids now going to a place that they have just explicitly indicated they're not interested in going to. And more importantly, none of the kids had to listen to each other, had to rethink their initial preference, had to consider why it might actually be fun in a way I hadn't thought about before to go to this other place. Nobody had to compromise. Nobody had to reach consensus. Maybe voting is necessary when you have tens or hundreds of millions of people deciding on something. But you sure as hell don't have to revert to this pathetic excuse for democracy in a group of a couple of dozen. Voting is just adversarial majoritarianism. It's not about democracy, it's about winning. The people who get more votes triumph over those who get fewer votes. Competition doesn't promote the best in us, here or anywhere else. And so when we have collective as opposed to just individual decision-making, the best version of that is going to involve discussion, meaningful listening, compromises, and consensus. It means bringing the kids in on it when there is a problem. And that's where we'll leave it for now. Now that there's a sense clearly of why it makes sense to do it, on what level, and in what domains we should do it, in the next episode of Kohn Zone, I'm going to talk more about how teachers can do this and why more teachers don't.